anymore, a professional like me. A guy who does the detective work nobody else wants to do. A guy who wears hats and walks around in a black and white world. I began contemplating a more profitable line of work, like politics.
We are the show you want to know. It's time to talk to you.
All right, folks. Good morning and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. I'm Joe Mangiacotti, and for the next hour, we'll be together, and that means you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. And, of course, you can text us. The text line is up and running at 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. That means the screen's here in the studio, and you can text in real time. We try to incorporate it into the conversation. All right, let's take care of some housekeeping. The station does stream 24/7 to the TuneIn app, which means you can take us anywhere. I love that feature. And, of course, you can tell Alexa to play WCRN, and she'll do that, no questions asked. Today, behind the glass, flying the board back at HQ, and he'll get you set up and into the studio for two-way talk and conversation at 508-871-7000. And the show does stream to the station's Facebook page, as well as my social media from the Cameo Studios, meaning the Cameo Cam is on. So you can do that on Facebook, X, Twitch, LinkedIn profile, YouTube, Rumble, and, yes, Instagram. So multiple ways to watch, multiple ways to listen. And remind you, folks, that when I get off the air, the show is then, within minutes, it's loaded up onto the podcast platform. So if you want to subscribe at Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts, again, subscribe to the Joe Mangiacotti Show, and you'll get this. If you can't listen live, it will be downloaded. You'll be notified every time I post something, whether it's here or independently of the show. 508-871-7000. So actually, I want to talk about Lindsay Clancy trial a little bit. This has been huge here in Massachusetts, national news. You hear it on the national news. But breaking a little while ago, court wrapped up for the day in Plymouth. 10 minutes before I came on the air, maybe. But don't confuse that with the defense resting its case. Kevin Reddington, he's expected to finish the defense Monday. That means the Commonwealth should still have an opportunity for rebuttal witnesses before we get to closing arguments, and ultimately the jury will determine what happened. Again, her doing this is not the issue, right? It's the criminal responsibility of it. Court did reconvene this morning. Now, Wednesday's unusual early dismissal of the jury that happened yesterday. We talked briefly about it while I was on the air. Yesterday, Judge William Sullivan sent jurors home because of an unspecified, unforeseen circumstances. And I'm not sure what that is. And the judge specifically told them not to speculate about what caused it. Now, the defense continued today, this morning, for a little while with witnesses. One significant witness was the hospital chaplain, who testified about the conversations with Clancy after the deaths. And according to reporting coming out of the courthouse this morning, Clancy expressed that she believed her children were safe and described believing that a voice had told her she and the children would otherwise not be safe. This becomes important to the voice. And not just when somebody says they hear the voice, there's a difference in this world in mental health as to whether the voice is inside or external voice. And that might not, to a lot of people, seem like that's a difference worth mentioning. But when it comes to mental health, in the psychology of it, it does make a difference. If the person's hearing that voice, again, internally in their head, or do they feel that they're hearing an outside voice? And this hospital chaplain, it matters because it gives the defense something different from an expert diagnosis. because a contemporaneous witness describing Clancy's thinking after the event. And they were hanging a lot on that. And the defense apparently has not rested yet. They haven't rested yet, so they get another crack on Monday. And Kevin Bennington said this morning the defense could rest today. So that's interesting. They felt they could rest if they wanted to, but they left the door open not to. And CBS reported that prosecutors were preparing to present rebuttal witnesses once this happens, or once that happens. So I'm not gonna tell you guys that testimony is finished on this case and the jury went out. No, we got another day anyway, at least. But I guess one of the biggest developments is that the expert went all the way. And I mean, psychologist Dr. Paul Ziesel gave the defense, I think, the opinion he needed. In his professional opinion, Lindsay Clancy was not criminally responsible for the deaths. And that makes a big difference in what she's found. And she could be found not guilty by criminal, or not criminally found responsible, I should say, for mental illness. And their sentences is very different. Now, he testified that severe mental illness prevented her from adequately appreciating the wrongfulness of what she was doing and her conforming her conduct to the requirements of the law. He diagnosed her with bipolar disorder and postpartum psychosis. That's enormously more important than simply having an expert say Lindsay Clancy was psychotic. The jury's legal question isn't merely whether she was mentally ill, it's essentially, was she so impaired by mental disease or defect that the Commonwealth cannot establish criminal responsibility under Massachusetts law? Ziesel has now answered that question directly for the defense. But prosecutors found their opening, right? This is where today's discussion gets a little interesting, because the prosecution challenged Ziesel's methodology, objectively an interpretation of Clancy's behavior. So prosecutors emphasize inconsistencies between severe psychosis and evidence suggesting Clancy could still function, communicate, and perform ordinary activities, like knowing what she was doing, sending the husband out for prescription and some other things. So they challenged the aspect of his conclusions in the information and what he was relying on. So that brings us back to the prosecution's strongest argument, doesn't it? Mental illness is not automatically legal insanity. So the prosecution, well, doesn't necessarily have to convince jurors that Lindsay Clancy was perfectly healthy, right? They can concede she was depressed, she was struggling, she was receiving psychiatric treatment. She can even have been seriously mentally ill. And then argue, but she still knew what she was doing, and she still knew that it was wrong. And that's the battlefield that they're on now. The prosecution's most powerful evidence remains planning. This is what I'm going to hammer in on, is what the jurors ultimately have to reconcile with Ziesel's testimony. It's because prosecutors have presented evidence, they say, demonstrate purposeful behavior and planning, like instructing the husband. Their theory is that Clancy deliberately created an opportunity when her husband was away from the house, which she orchestrated, and then carried out the intentional acts. The defense says apparently organized behavior doesn't rule out psychosis. So let's put the question to you guys. Can somebody be organized enough to plan something and still be legally insane? The defense says absolutely. The Commonwealth essentially says, look at what she did, not simply the diagnosis applied afterwards. And that is a much harder question than, was Lindsay Clancy mentally ill? Something else happened that may have hurt the prosecution too. I guess there's another development. Prosecutor Shannon Buckingham questioned Clancy's former mother-in-law, Susan Clancy, about her Catholic faith. I don't know if you were watching the trial, that got some gasps and some clutching with my pearls, right? But asked her about her Catholic faith and whether murder constituted a mortal sin. And Judge Sullivan stopped the questioning, instructed the jurors to disregard that. Again, they murmured, oh, what are they doing? Talking about Catholics, religion. A legal analyst subsequently characterized the move as a major prosecutorial mistake because it risked injecting religion and moral judgment into a legal determination of criminal responsibility. And that doesn't decide the case, guys. But after weeks of emotionally brutal testimony, prosecutors don't want jurors wondering whether the Commonwealth is trying to obtain a moral judgment rather than prove the legal elements of this case. And Reddington attempted to call former McLean Hospital employee Emily Thorndike, whose TikTok criticism of McLean's treatment of Clancy attracted huge attention. The judge wouldn't allow her testimony before the jury, largely because she wasn't working at McLean during Clancy's admission. The defense did, however, obtain permission to introduce certain hospital staffing program records. And that's actually an important ruling because it prevents the trial from becoming a referendum on social media criticism of McLean. So where do we stand this morning? The defense has now accomplished something absolutely needed to accomplish, but an expert before the jury willing to connect Lindsay Clancy's psychiatric condition directly to mass criminal responsibility standard. But the prosecution has a powerful response. Don't diagnose the crime backwards. In other words, don't start with the horrifying result, find evidence that she was mentally ill, and automatically conclude she couldn't understand her actions. Instead, prosecutors want juries examining her conduct at the time of the killing. So that's the question for the jury. Not was Lindsay Clancy mentally ill? There appears to be overwhelming evidence that she was suffering serious psychiatric problems, right? And it's not, did Lindsay Clancy cause the deaths? No, that isn't really the dispute here at all. The question is, did Lindsay Clancy understand what she was doing and understand that it was wrong? And that leads us to the harder question. If a person suffering psychosis can still make plans, follow routines, communicate normally, and conceal behavior, does that prove criminal responsibility? Or can all of those things coexist with psychosis? That's where the trial is now. So I would not say the case has moved materially in the defense's favor by any means. As a statement of fact there, I wouldn't say that. That's analysis. Better, the defense scored perhaps its most important testimony yet. And the Commonwealth still gets rebuttal witnesses, and those experts may directly challenge Ziesel's diagnosis and criminal responsibility conclusion. But we'll keep checking in on that, folks. All right, this is the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. You can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Our text line is up and running at 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. All right, so tonight, Markey versus Moulton, the final debate. I'm going to bring it back to the politics a little bit here. Tonight, Massachusetts Democrats get one last look at the two men fighting for the nomination for the United States Senate, right? On one side, you got Ed Markey, 80 years old, more than a half a century in elected office, progressive icon, Green New Deal champion, I should say, and one of Donald Trump's most consistent critics. And on the other, you've got Seth Moulton. He's 47 years old, a Marine combat veteran, congressman, occasional Democratic Party troublemaker, telling mass it's time for a new generation to take over. Sounds like a dramatic ideological showdown. Except there's the problem. They agree on an awful lot, guys. hard to really put a piece of paper between them, isn't it? They don't want major changes to immigration enforcement. I would think the Marine would at least want to enforce laws and borders. Both oppose much of Trump's agenda. Both support aggressive climate action. Both support substantial federal investment. Both are criticizing Israeli policy. Both say they're defending abortion rights. So what's the race really about? Increasingly, it's about age, effectiveness, and what Democrats think their party needs to become. And right now, Democratic voters are giving us unsurprisingly clear answers. So that UMass CVB poll, right, that has Markey ahead, 60-32. That's a big gap, guys. Get this. The 80-year-old Markey is even beating the 47-year-old Moulton in the 18 to 29-year-olds. So the support isn't along the age lines, right? That's not what they're seeing on the ages. So tonight, Seth Moulton, he has a bit of a problem, wouldn't you say? He can't simply tell voters, hey, Ed Markey's old. They know he's old. He has to answer a much harder question. If you agree with Ed Markey on so much, why should Massachusetts Democrats fire Ed Markey and hire you? Fair question, no? And for those of us who aren't voting in the Democratic primary, and I know some of you are going to pull that ticket and go back to unenrolled, and that's perfectly within your right to do that. But for those of us who aren't voting in the Democratic primary, I think there's an even more interesting reason to watch tonight. Forget which man wins the debate. Watch what they're arguing about. Pay attention to what they're arguing about. Get over the age. Watch the positions neither candidate is willing to challenge. Watch where they compete to move further left. And they will do that because they have to talk to the base tonight. Watch where Moulton tries to pull Democrats towards the center and whether Markey punishes him for doing it. Watch that. Because this debate isn't merely telling us who Massachusetts Democrats want as their senator. It's telling us what Massachusetts Democrats believe their party should look like in 2026. And that may be the bigger story here tonight. Tonight's debate is information in stream. It's available. You can do it on BUR's Markey Moulton debate coverage. The Secretary of State confirms Markey and Moulton are the only two Democratic candidates that will be on the September 1st primary ballot. So tonight's debate is the third and final for this U.S. Senate primary. And then it goes on, of course, to the general. Does a Republican have a chance for a Senate seat? You know, I've noticed in a lot of debate, because the gerrymandering and actually the Supreme Court decision about you can't use race to gerrymander anymore, which the left hates, right? They tried to tell us that if that's the case, no Latino or Black will ever be elected again. Yet where they're trying to tell us, we're back to when I got into this Black Republicans and conservatives yesterday, because we have Black conservatives, Black Republicans in the Senate, in Congress, and they didn't come from gerrymandered racial districts. Senators are elected statewide from the states they represent. But the left is crazy about this. But I'm seeing Massachusetts and actually New England often being brought up as on national shows and national discussion about the fact that Massachusetts doesn't have one Republican in our federal delegation. And all we have is one senator. We don't even have a congressperson from the entire New England region, 6 states. We have one, Susan Collins, one senator. And one could argue how Republican she is, but let's put a pin in that. She's Republican. That's all that matters for this part of the conversation. And all of the New England states have successfully gerrymandered the chance of Republicans right out. And I'm seeing it more and more referenced. I watched Ted Cruz talk about it the other day. And there's 40+% identify as Republican, like in Massachusetts. And we don't have one Republican congressperson. I think it might have been since Peter Blue. I have to check that. But again, I think the political element, human element should be taken out of districting, and it should just be done by an algorithm or AI who draws the line solely on population. That's it. And that's the way it should be done, because that would be true representation. So whether it's a congressional district or a state rep seat or state senate seat, it would be a district that's continuous, right? That makes sense. It isn't weirdly shaped like a salamander, and that's where gerrymandering came from. And it's named after a Massachusetts politician, of course. We all know that. But I mean, look at the Worcester, right? That was Peter Blutz, and then it's McGovern's. I mean, that district has had the weirdest shapes, where it could go from New Hampshire down to New Bedford. And they're drawn on keeping a Democrat in power opposed to truly representing a district. And actually, if we're talking about state rep seats and state senate seats, when you start drawing these districts for them to maintain the power, you're losing the purpose of that representative, whether it's the Senate or the state house, right? Or the state reps. Because they draw them so weird and spread out so much that the interests, say, of New Bedford aren't the same interests of Gardner or Greenfield or Worcester, for that matter. But if they were truly drawn, radiating out from the center of the district and stopping where they reach the population instead of those gerrymandering shapes, then the representation, the person being elected to represent that House seat or that Senate seat, is truly representing a district and the people who live in that district. I don't know if that conveyed properly or not. But you really dilute the purpose of that representative from that district when that district includes 3 or 4 districts by touching all over the map. So true representation and true accurate representation for state senators or state reps, and of course for our congressional delegation, it would be done by algorithms that simply do it by population, or AI that does it by population. And we take the entire political aspect out of it. In other words, when we ask to draw this, I don't think whether it's the human or it's the computer, we should not be looking at their party affiliation or whether they even vote. Because the district isn't drawn on whether you vote or the number of people that vote in that district. It's just drawn on the number of people who live in the district. So it should be based on people who live, who are citizens. If you're hiding because you're illegal, I don't think you should be calculated in. That shouldn't be part of the calculus of the representation, which is going to bleed into the argument, right, of the census. And look what happened with the last census. When they admitted that Rhode Island, they fudged the numbers in Rhode Island, they fudged the numbers in Massachusetts to keep congressional seats. They were counting illegals. Illegals can't be counted. They can be counted, sure, as a secondary type of matrix, another part of information on the census. But what is the purpose of the census? Why did the founding fathers give us a census every 10 years? It was to determine where our citizens live. And our representation in Washington has to be based on that, not in the Senate, of course, but in the House, the lower chamber. And so it should be based only on American citizens residing in that district. That's not a difficult thing to understand, right? So tonight isn't really Markey's debate to win. It's Moulton's debate to survive this. Markey's objective is simple tonight. Don't make a catastrophic mistake. And Moulton needs to fundamentally change voters' perception of the race. So you're going to watch it tonight? I'm not on tomorrow to talk about it a little bit, but it'll be interesting. It's worth it. Again, Markey 80, Moulton 47. He says it's time for generational change. He points out Markey's been in office longer than Moulton has been alive. You saw this with Joe Biden, too. Think about it. 50 years. We're celebrating our 250th anniversary. In other words, you've been in the federal government, you've been in government for 1/5 of the existence of the country. Markey's in that boat, so is Joe Biden. And 7 veteran House Democrats have lost primaries this cycle amid a broader anti-establishment generational revolt. And of course, Markey is coming back with experience isn't incapacity. But at what point does it happen? But folks, we have to take our mid-show break here on the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. Lines are open and available, and our text line is operating at 617-297-8388. Back in a moment, folks.
WCRN. Time now for the forecast from the Boston Independence Group Weather Center. Call Jerry Doherty today at 877-772-1776. Retirement is within reach.
I'm Boston 25 Chief Meteorologist Sherry Spear, and here's the latest Boston 25 weather on Radio 830 WCRN. You're going to see increasing clouds during the afternoon with highs in the mid and upper 80s. Humidity levels are going to be moderate for today, but we do have the chance for showers popping up anytime from mid-afternoon and beyond, with the bulk of our rain expected during the evening hours. We're going to keep some scattered showers going at times on Friday, as well as temperatures drop back into the 70s for highs. I'm Chief Meteorologist Sherry Spear, and you can hear Boston 25 live for the morning drive weekdays on AM 830 WCRN.
Information central to your day from Radio Central, 830 WCRN.
Buy new furniture, design your new furniture. Visit O'Shea's Furniture in Sutton and you will be able to work with the staff to design your furniture from the frame up to include the color and style of the furniture. O'Shea's works with Amish furniture makers and they will build your furniture to your desire with quality craftsmanship and quality materials, and the price is competitive. Check them out online or stop into their showroom on 113 Singletary Ave, Sutton. You won't be sorry you did.
The best Italian cuisine served by some of the nicest folks you'll ever meet is at Ziti's Italian Trattoria. It's fine Italian cooking at the Speedway Shopping Center, 290 Turnpike Road in Westboro. It's like sitting down with your family for an authentic home-cooked Italian meal. From intimate dinners to catering for events of all sizes. From pizzas and calzones to classic Italian dinners. Every meal at Ziti's is one you'll remember. Head on down to Ziti's, 290 Turnpike Road in Westboro.
All right, folks, welcome back here. Second half of Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here in AM 30 WCRN. Don't forget, you can join the conversation for the time we have left together at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. You can text at 617-297-8388. 617-297-8388. All right. What else we got going on? Trump escalates the Iran economic war. Interesting, guys. Right. So, and this is actually kind of interesting because Trump has delivered a message to the world concerning Iran. And it's no longer simply, hey, don't help Iran militarily. It's increasingly don't help Iran economically either. See, the president now is warning countries that provide what he calls any type of a lifeline to Tehran that they could face economic consequences from us. And that's a significant escalation. They fired a couple, by the way, Tehran fired a couple missiles at the AUE the other day, and the AUE turned around and broke all trade and economic ties off to them. I would too. I mean, if somebody threw a couple missiles at me, wouldn't you kind of cut them off? Funny thing is, Tehran's coming back and saying, hey, they are those missiles. They weren't us. Do they really think we don't have the technology to see where something has come from? Especially right now, that part of the world is probably the most monitored part of the world, maybe running with Ukraine, but it's a lot harder for us because it's our military action. How many satellites and infrared cameras and all kinds of monitors and drones do you think we have trained on Iran right now? That's so silly to come up with something like that. But that's a significant escalation, any type of a lifeline, because America has sanctioned Iran for decades. And what's the difference here is the threat to widen the target. You want to buy Iranian oil? You want to, move Iranian money? You want to help Tehran escape American economic isolation? The message appears to be, then doing business with Iran may have consequences for your ability to do business with us. And that can work. Because access to the American economy and the American financial system is an extraordinarily powerful weapon. And I would say Donald Trump's administration probably has used the economic might of the United States about as effectively as any president ever has, probably more so than any president. I think, Ronald Reagan did. I'm not sure he understood that he was doing it, but we just outspent them in the Cold War because we had to. And in the Reagan years, the old Soviet Union were parking tanks and equipment on their border as if they were posing and getting ready for something. And what we didn't know till the latter part of it is they parked them there and left them there because they couldn't even put gas in them or maintain them. Half of them didn't run. And we finally just outspent them. That and Reagan firing all the air traffic controllers was the catalyst for the collapse of the Soviet Union. But this can work because of the access to the American economy. It does get complicated, though. What happens when the country you're threatening isn't some tiny economy? What happens if that lifeline comes from China? China. Right. China remains enormously important to Iran's oil trade. So is Donald Trump really prepared to economically punish major Chinese interests to shut down Tehran's remaining revenue? Because if he isn't, Iran has a hole in the blockade. And if he is willing, right, we may be opening an entirely new economic confrontation with Beijing. Meanwhile, Brent crude, right, is pushing towards what, $94 a barrel today. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains severely disrupted. Our blockade's still there. And the economic consequences of this war are already being felt far beyond Iran. So here's the question I guess I'm going to pose and put to you guys. How far should America be willing to go to economically isolate Iran? My personal opinion is as far as it takes, but I also think that Trump is being played, because if he doesn't understand that everything and anything they say right now for a deal is a crock. We know who they are, and we're not dealing with a normal state. We're dealing with a fanatical religion that's running a country. Imams and caves who believe these things about virgins and Allah, and it's just you can't run a country in a secular world this way. And that they're totally allowed to BS us and lie to us, and that as long as this regime has power and the guns, they will never, ever, ever, never, ever stop trying to obtain a nuclear weapon through development or purchase or stealing, or it just isn't going to happen. And this is just prolonging this. And every one of these little memorandums is just bull. Okay, 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. Let's go to Tyler. Hey, Tyler, what say you? It's been a little while. Do I have you there, Tyler?
I can hear you, Joe.
There you are. What's up, man?
Hey, bud, how are you?
Good. What do you want to talk about? Which issue?
Well, it's crystal clear. Did she do it or not with the kids? Yes. Battle of the experts. She can be aware and be nuts and get it done. Conscience of guilt plan while the dad's away. It's not an excuse. She's got to go to prison. I don't care how much medication. That's absurd. And Joe, the Markey commercial, 80 years old. I have to fight for it. This is theater, my friend. And the reason they're fighting for stand up against corporations and high costs, well, Joe, they've been there for 50 years for us. And she's wrote a book, and Bernie passed the post office. So under their watch, it's been happening, and it's not, and he's going to stick up for us. That's absurd. And Joe, this isn't funny anymore. We went in 79 and threw out the Shah of Iran and nationalized the oil companies, which technically is illegal. But enough money and enough will and enough oil companies, it's not the regime, Joe. No country and government destroys its own people, blocks and kills everyone's talking about it. It's a military coup that's been there for 30 years. It's insane to manipulate the oil in the straits. Joe, that's the world's water. Why are we the only ones stepping up and protecting our doorway and our bank vault to the world's economy? What's going on here? It's so obvious. It seems almost silly that we've been talking about.
That's a great point, Tyler, right? Because what was Trump saying? I mean, when he came out the other day and said the Strait of Hormuz is now a territory of the United States, I mean, I laughed. I thought it was hysterical. Of course it isn't, right? But the fact that Trump says that, it just, you know that the imams in the IRGC generals and stuff are going out of their mind, because they've always thought of the Strait of Hormuz as their secondary secret weapon type of thing. And I agree 100%. Where the hell are all of the other countries that enjoy the Strait of Hormuz and use that waterway? I know that they've started building the pipeline and all that kind of jazz, but why? And it's going to be a rhetorical question in a second. Why has Iran been able to always do this? Because they've been such bullies. They've been such bullies in that they have taken all of their really, resources that they have from selling their dirty oil and everything, and they put it into missiles, in military, in weapons. So whether they admit it or not, but whether it's the AUE, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, all of those places, they've always been a little afraid of Iran, period.
Right.
And that's why they've been able to do what they can do at the Strait of Iran, because they're the bullies. And nobody has come along till the United States and punched the bully in the nose.
Yes, sir. Joe, an international waterway is the key conduit. Just because by happen chance it's geographically located in front of your country, it's an international waterway critical to the world's economy. You can't run into the bank and rob it. And the fact that we're putting up with them and their thugs and the money we caught and sent over there, it's like a bad movie. And the economy and the environment and the social and the emotional welfare of the world depends on stopping war hawks and fools who violate common sense. Joe, let me ask you, bud, when you and I are doing something and we have competition and say Amazon, and your experience and knowledge and knowing how to run a business is an asset and an advantage. But in politics, you feather your nest, you do what you're told, you toe the party line, like you just said. What's the difference between Markey and the new guy? This is sports and movies, and it's gotten out of control where they don't really make sense. The things they say don't add up. And then to call Trump out and blame him for a Nazi agenda and say you got to stop ICE. That, anyone listening to this, if you feel safer or not with these maniacs, they're wanted for murder and they're fugitives from a prison. You don't need to give them a Miranda right. You have what's called an automatic ability to arrest based upon their illegals and criminal warrant status. And they want to stop getting them out of here. What's going on, bud?
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's true. Look, this entire ICE thing, I've talked about it now for what, almost 2 years. It's amazing because we can't pick and choose laws, and we can't pick and choose what federal agents and officers are allowed to do their job. It pains me when these mayors and governors come out and talk about sanctuary city. Folks, it's not a thing. There's no mechanism to opt out of the federal government. That's like these DSA people, Tyler, right? I mean, have you heard their platform? They want to. They literally have come out and said the obstacle in our way is the Constitution. They want to eliminate the Senate. They want to eliminate the presidency. Do you not understand? That's the United States of America. You can't do it. First of all, it's our blueprint. Our founding documents put these things in place. It would require constitutional amendment, which is never going to happen. It's as if they're so, I'm sorry, they're stupid. They're uneducated. They're ignorant about the country they live in. And why do they think the answer is to change the country fundamentally opposed to changing one thing at a time within the country?
Right, because they're irrational. From anger and fear creates an irrational response. Joe, this is extremely important. You're going to love this. Ted's going to love this. It's important that President Trump, there's an area in Texas where the river is a beautiful, massive attraction for tourists. They're not running across the river in front of tourists on camera to immigrate, but they're going to think of putting a wall up, which will cut off the river and destroy the ecosystem and literally block the whole, what you call that, natural wildlife from getting water. You guys really need to get on that to Trump and make a variance. You don't need a wall where people are tourism. That's not what they're doing.
Well, my understanding is Rio Grande and along the water separating Mexico and the United States, they've deployed floating things, these floating tubes, basically a floating fence. It shouldn't affect the fish life at all. Maybe some of the wildlife, but they're not really crossing the river. They're drinking on either side.
Joe, you're right. That's a different matter. That's exactly right. That's where they had a problem. There's a massive story about to come out. There's a national park, and it's tourist laden. And the wall, they're talking about putting up a real tall wall, which will block the coyotes, the pumas, the cougars, and all those animals.
I haven't heard about the wall.
Yeah, a real wall, Joe. Not what you're calling the floating island thing is brilliant. the real wall, God, think, it's going to block them from the water, the breeding, and the access to resources. It'll really cause a catastrophic.
That's not a good idea. All right, Tyler, thank you very much. You got a final thought?
Yeah, please focus on solutions, not problems. And remember, does it make sense and does it ring true? Does it seem more like theater and same old thing? You know, focus on the essence and realize your children's future, the security and safety of our society, our economy, and our national debt and our future, not war, but building a happy, well-fed world that will save us all.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyler, thank you for the call. Greatly appreciate it. Always an interesting call. All right, folks, 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. And don't forget our text line, 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. My final thought on this sanction, right? Because what is Trump doing? The strategy, pretty straightforward, guys. Iran has survived decades of sanctions because it continues finding countries and banks and companies, intermediaries, and trading networks willing to conduct business with it. So instead of merely telling Iran, we're sanctioning you, Trump has effectively told everyone else, if you help Iran invade isolation or evade it, you may lose access to us. That's secondary sanctions territory, guys, right? Traditional and primary sanctions restrict Americans and American businesses from dealing with targeted country. Secondary sanctions, that is the attempt to influence foreign companies and financial institutions by making it continued dealings with Iran potentially costly to them. So costly they won't do it because it's going to affect their access to the American financial system or us, the U.S. market. And the Congressional Research Service has described exactly that distinction and discussed in previous Iran sanctions. And that's why this could be enormous. But it's China is the elephant in the room here, right? Forget South Korea for a moment and everything. China is the real test. China remains the critical buyer of Iranian oil. Reuters reports that independent Chinese refiners have been especially important purchasers of Iranian crude. And the administration has considered targeting those refiners and potentially financial institutions facilitating Iranian transactions. That's relatively easy when you're sanctioning some obscure shell company. But it's very different when you start threatening Chinese banks, Chinese refineries, major Chinese companies, because then Iran policy starts becoming China policy. And Beijing isn't going to simply say, oh, okay, Mr. President, thank you. We're okay with that. China has already responded to Trump's latest threat by calling for diplomacy and warning against additional economic pressure. So is Trump willing to economically punish China for keeping Iran alive? Because if he isn't, Tehran has found a substantial hole in the entire strategy and it falls apart. And if he is, then Trump is risking opening another economic confrontation with America's largest strategic competitor, and that is a dilemma. In the UAE, right, that just made Trump's job easier. It's a significant development with them because the United Arab Emirates has suspended trade and financial transactions with Iran following that missile incident I told you about. And the UAE attributes it to Iran. And as I said, Tehran, they're denying the responsibility. They're trying to tell I always want to say AUE, the UAE, hey, it wasn't us. But the UAE matters enormously because it has historically been a major Iranian trading partner and commercial re-export hub for them. So when one of Iran's regional economic outlets suddenly constricting, that makes the timing of Trump's next move here especially interesting. He isn't issuing the threat while Iran's economic environment is improving. He's trying to increase pressure while Tehran is already vulnerable. And how much pressure is Iran already under? It's a lot, right? Treasury has been systematically targeting Iran's financial networks. Example, back on July 10th, Treasury sanctioned financial facilitator Ali Asari and Iranian exchange houses, alleging that the network moved billions annually for sanctioned Iranian banks and regime figures. And stuff like that has always happened when sanctions have been imposed, and it always has happened. But his administrations like this, and Scott Bassett, Treasury, they're watching, and they're not going to let this stuff slide that other administrations had let slide. Reuters reported this week that Treasury has targeted more than 1,000 individuals and entities connected to Iran as Washington attempts to disrupt oil sales and financial networks and other revenue sources. So Trump's announcement, guys, is not, let's start sanctioning Iran. No. Its existing sanctions haven't produced the outcome we want. We're considering widening the economic battlefield. And that's a very different story. How do they keep surviving? 47 years of sanctions in one way or another. How do they keep surviving? Sanctions aren't a giant electrical switch that turns a country's economy off, right? It's because Iran adapts, trades, shifts. Intermediaries appear. New financial routes get developed. Different buyers emerge. And Reuters described Treasury's enforcement challenge as essentially whack-a-mole. Choose one route, another may appear. That's why Trump wants to change the calculation of the other countries. Instead of Iran asking, can we find somebody willing to buy? The prospective buyer has to ask, is doing business with Iran worth risking a relationship with the United States? And that's the leverage we have right now. But we have another big economic problem. Oil. Oil is always an economic problem, isn't it? Trump has another problem here, right? Pushing Iran can punish us, Americans. I said the Brent crude today, right, climbed to about $94 a barrel. WTI has been around 87, 88. And both reached their highest levels in more than 3 weeks today. Why? Because markets are increasingly worried this confrontation isn't ending. And look back over the last few months, right? Every time it kind of looked like it was ending, the memorandum of this, and oil went down. Because oil's a commodity, which is traded on futures. But because markets are increasingly worried this confrontation isn't ending, oil's going back up. And the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important pieces of water on the entire earth. Before the conflict, roughly a fifth of globally traded oil moved through it. So Trump faces a difficult contradiction here, doesn't he? Squeeze Iran harder, but don't squeeze global oil supply so hard that American consumers pay the price. We are already, right? Energy Analyst today reports that the problem isn't simply crude oil. And I've talked about this over and over again, guys. It's a refining. Our refineries, our refining capacity has also been badly disrupted. We haven't built new oil refineries in decades. We're using very old technology, very old equipment, very old plants. And that, my friends, is a massive piece of the puzzle when it comes to oil. Because oil coming out of the ground has very few uses, right? Refining it for gasoline and diesel and lubricant and then everything else that comes from it, that takes a lot of work, a lot of refining, and our refining capacity has been badly disrupted. The resulting energy shock has contributed to sharply higher fuel prices, inflationary pressure, and remember our other story today. And I don't know if I get time to get to this, but $40 trillion national debt, we passed it. Let me put a pin in the oil for a second and what's going on there. But America, we only got a couple minutes here, but America's $40 trillion debt. The gross U.S. national debt officially crossed the 40 trillion mark 2 days ago, August 18th. Treasury daily Treasury statement put total public debt outstanding at approximately $40.047 trillion. The Washington Post key point is important. America reached $40 trillion months earlier than forecasters had anticipated. Reuters breaks the $40 trillion debt into roughly a breakdown here of 32.3 trillion debt held by the public and 7.8 trillion intergovernmental holdings. And that distinction matters because critics will correctly point out that the 40 trillion isn't all the money owed to China, banks, and investors. And what does that mean to us? Well, here's the simplest explanation because we only got about a minute left here. Washington routinely spends more money than it collects. The difference is the deficit. Treasury borrows to cover those deficits, and all that accumulated borrowing becomes the national debt. For fiscal year 26, the Congressional Budget Office projects another deficit, approximately 1.9 trillion. That's about 5.8% of GDP. For perspective here, deficits average approximately 3.8% of GDP over the previous 50 years. And here's the frightening part. We're running enormous deficits without currently being in a conventional recession. Historically, you'd expect deficit to explode during recession, war on national emergency. Now massive deficits have become normal operating procedure. Folks, this is going to wrap up the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Follow me at Joe Mangi Show, MANGI, JoeMangiShow.com. And, of course, subscribe to the podcast where you'll get all the trophies and other things that we do. But this will wrap it up. Have a fantastic weekend, folks. Joe out.